Oak Life Familia, what is good? It is Chris and Chris back at it again with another Roots and Branches. And today, per the title, we will be continuing the conversation that we started this past Sunday around atonement. And what does that mean for us understanding God's identity? We'll be right back.
Yeah, look, I get crazy when the mic round. No sense of getting hyped now. But
Bam.
I've missed that little riff.
It's
remember
good,
when
right?
we used to do this every week?
Oh, man.
This was our life. We lived in these little boxes.
We did. These are cozy boxes, man. They're pretty cozy. I'm not mad at them. I like the boxes. And I like the riff. Sentimental value. And if you don't know the sentimental value, ask me about it because we ain't got time today. What we are doing is we're talking about atonement theory. And what does that mean? We opened a box that I feel we didn't have enough time to unpackage this past Sunday, hence these boxes today. So, Chris, give us a recap for anybody who hasn't watched this past Sunday service. What were we talking about? And then I'll have some more questions after that.
Cool. Well, we were week 3 into being back in person in this stage of COVID-19 pandemic world. And the conversation, the broader topic has been, what is God like? And as we've opened up that and described God as love, one thing that came up was the cross. It came up in multiple conversations, even in amidst our Sunday conversation. How does the cross show us love? And is it loving to, what happened on the cross? Some of the language we are used to doesn't feel that loving. It feels like violent, or it just doesn't, it's hard to square with love. Like if love is benevolence, giving, self-sacrificing, a lot of us grew up with views of the atonement, what happened on the cross, that describe God as wrathful and needing to punish sin, and that we all deserve hell, and instead of us going to hell, Jesus died on our behalf. And is there merit to that? How does that describe love? What are the different ways of looking at this? And it's a big conversation. It was kind of an exercise in some of the things we've been practicing earlier, which is looking at God through the lens of love. And if there's ways that we've missed the mark, then we should think through that and wrestle with that. Always kind of growing in love, if God really is love. And a lot of our theology is often framed from our cultural context, and we view God through our own judicial system, our own sense of hierarchies or rule or law or power. And so sometimes we get that wrong. And so how do we re-examine all that? So looking at the cross through the lens of love, and it's a huge conversation. It's very consequential for Christians. This is like the event that frames the conversation, soteriology, which is the study of salvation, that the cross is the moment when salvation happened for a lot of Christians. Salvation meaning being rescued or saved or made right, reconnected to God. And for a lot of Christians, especially in America, it all comes down to the cross. But what does it say about God? What is God like? And so I'll just do a quick recap. I don't know, this is all supposed to have been recap, but I'll share a couple slides. What we did was we read the passage of Scripture, the account of the crucifixion from the Gospel of Luke, and then I tried to summarize the different ways that folks have described the atonement, this event, how we've tried to quantify what happened over the centuries. So really quick, let me share my screen, and then we'll take it from there. So this was, if anybody cares, these were some of the books that informed the conversation, and they're just some good, much broader, deeper volumes of work and study on salvation and the atonement. But actually that first one, The Nature of the Atonement, 4 views by those 4 people, that's a great introduction. But here are the models. So we went through all of these in 25, 30 minutes, 35 minutes. I don't know how long I went, but each of these could have, had a 40-minute lecture. So I tried to summarize these different ways that folks have viewed the cross. And the heart here was to say, hey, maybe some of the things you've been taught aren't the only way to look at this. And I think the journey of theology is expansive, not narrow. If our theology is like narrowing us down and it's getting us more exclusive, I think it's incongruent with the idea of God as something beyond us and holy and bigger than our understanding. So this event that happened in history, like any event, it gets interpreted at different points in time differently. And so I tried to overview it all, like these different ideas. Moral influence theory, that it was just an example for us to follow. Like, this is what it means to be good and loving and righteous, is to be like Jesus. And then satisfaction, ransom, and penal substitutionary atonement all say that something functionally happened in exchange, like in a cosmic, even molecular level, like reality shifted on the cross. Satisfaction theory, meaning there's some debt or some sort of penalty that needed to be paid, and that was corrected. Ransom theory means that we were, as humanity, as the world, we're held captive by something, either our own stuff or the devil. Usually it's like Satan or the devil. And so instead of, if you study or like read any captive story, there's always a ransom to be paid. And this idea that Jesus paid the ransom to the devil. And then the big one, penal substitutionary atonement, which is very judicial. There's a specific price for our penalty, and it has to be paid in blood. The wages of sin is death, is what some of the scriptural language includes. And so we all deserve death based on our sin. And instead of us, there's a substitute to pay the price in a very like kind of legal sense. Like, you think of the courtroom, somebody getting convicted of a crime, and this person steps in to take the punishment, even though they didn't do anything wrong. And our sins are atoned. And there's some beauty to that, but it describes God as like needing like blood and like having wrath and hating sin so much that has to pour out the wrath. And so there's problems there. And I'll keep going. I'll try to summarize as fast as I can the last few. Actually, we don't need to hurry, huh? We're not going to get kicked out. So I'll try to be concise. But Christus Victor is usually actually more of a common liberation theology view of the cross. And it's that it's a moment of victory, Christ the victor, that through love and sacrifice, through self-giving, is actually how we diffuse, disarm, and overcome evil, darkness, sin, even death. C.S. Lewis in the Chronicles of Narnia calls it a deeper magic. Like, we have the way of our world where you conquer, you gain by conquest and killing and colonizing and taking over. But the actual like laws of God, reality at a deeper level, are that love is self-sacrifice, and we unlock something and we overcome things. And so at the cross, Jesus overcame, like conquered sin, death, and evil. And so when he says it's finished, that's what happened. Recapitulation means to put on a new capital or a new head. It means to transform it. Like, so it's a moment of flipping everything upside down. So sin, death, and evil are repurposed for good, like become something else altogether. Incarnational friendship is a way to look at the cross. It just says that God is with us. That's kind of the end of it. Nothing happened, but God was with us in our suffering, and that's what it teaches us. And then there's a couple others that I didn't get into that aren't that much different than others. The scapegoat is an interesting one because it essentially is saying that like we needed to put the blame for everything on somebody, and God is willing to do that for us. It actually goes back to the word scapegoat itself goes back to some of the Jewish tradition of having a scapegoat where you put the sin on this animal and send it out. And so it's kind of like we as people, we're just angry. We have to blame somebody, something. And so this gives us a chance to put all of our wrath onto something rather than like God's wrath. And I would say identification, from what I remember, it's pretty similar to incarnational friendship, but the God identifies. It shows how God is with us and identifies in a preferential way with those who are suffering. So that's what we went through. And I think, yeah, that's pretty much it. We kind of ended with, I don't know how it all works. There's mystery here, but I know that God is with us out of love in our suffering, our brokenness, etc., and that those things are not the final word. That's like, if I don't know exactly how forgiveness, what, sin was cleansed, like how that functionally happened, and like a formula, but I do know that God is with us out of love in the midst of all of this stuff. That's what the cross tells me, and that those things are not the final word. That the empty tomb is, that resurrection, that hope and new life are. So that's where we kind of ended it. And I got a couple of points of feedback from people. Some folks really enjoying that we opened that conversation, and other people being like, that raised a bunch of questions, and it was clear as mud. So that's why we wanted to do a follow-up. And we thought about doing another Sunday, but ultimately felt like we had something planned for the Sunday that I think will be really special, and feel like there's some other spaces we can continue this conversation. We can never solve everything on a Sunday. I think the hope is to set the table as best we can, and then for each of us to take it on ourselves to go into the feast and explore and taste and to dig in. So does that kind of summarize it? Does it sound about right?
Yeah, totally. A few questions come to mind. First of all, if something you just most recently stated is that we can't solve it all. So why is it important to have an understanding of these varying theologies and theories around atonement? Like, we can't solve it. So why is it important to know these things?
Yeah, good question. Because you could just be like, what does it matter? I think how we define God, how we like understand God really, really matters. Because it's a question about like, what's the truest thing about existence, about life, about me, about how I should see others. Even if you just use the word reality, like, what is reality about? What is my existence about? If you don't believe in God or use different language. And if we see God as tribal or about power and domination and requiring of humanity to obey and blind allegiance, which is a common view of God that I would say like the Penal Substitutionary Atonement model kind of supports, then we'll look at power and hierarchies and look at other people a certain way. And so I think it has consequences for how we see ourselves and others. And so I think the invitation for us as people is to learn and grow. And so looking at all these models is kind of like looking under the hood, like, and seeing what's there. You don't have to. You could totally do the Matrix thing, the ignorance is bliss, like just hang out if it's working for you. But for a lot of people, it's not working. Like they know that steak that the guy tastes. I can't remember that guy. What's his character?
I don't remember, but I wish I could play that clip because I know exactly what you're talking about. It's awesome.
Yeah, the steak tastes good, but there's other people who are like, yeah, but it came at a cost and it's hurting these other people and it's not the truth. And so you're trying to get into that deeper thing. So looking at this history of our broader conversation hopefully brings you to a deeper connection to truth, to reality, to love. And I think that process is what's called intimacy, like wrestling and exploring and growing and learning. So that's why I would say it's important.
Yeah. I'm all for that. And it sounds like kind of in a soundbite, how we understand God is directly connected to how we move in the world, how we treat one another, how we treat ourselves. And these varying perspectives are varying perspectives about our understanding of God. So we study these, it helps us understand who God is, what God is, and then that impacts how we move in the world as believers, as humans, so on and so forth.
Yes, totally. And there are dominant voices that claim to describe God that I think a good chunk of us are seeing, that's something's off there. Maybe there's like, they're 80% of the, like in the right area, but there's this other 20% that's just like causing a lot of harm. And I think diagnosing that and counterbalancing that is part of, I would argue, like the calling of a church like Oak Life, like to tell a bigger story of God than what a lot of us were taught.
Interesting. A couple of times you've mentioned a dominant, well, let me rephrase that. You mentioned a dominant voice, and a couple of times you mentioned penal substitution being kind of the dominant theory around atonement. Why do you think that is the most commonly understood version of atonement or the cross?
Why? Like how it got to be?
How it got to be, or why it has the staying power? Because that was the first one and the only one I thought existed for a long time. And some of these other ones that you had mentioned, while many of them overlap, I've never heard of at all. So what is it about this particular one that has had the staying power that is made it the dominant voice around our understanding?
Well, I think it's in its history, at least in America. Its history is rooted in the Protestant Reformation and some of the reformers and their view of what happened. And in that context, like the sense of justice in terms of like judicial justice was how people were seeing theology and doing theology. And there was this, there's probably a myriad of cultural reasons that became the way to talk about God in that moment. But I would say it just stuck and became popularized in Protestant circles, especially Protestant evangelical circles. And it's a pretty powerful story if you think about it. Like, right, so this is in America, the American Christian consciousness, like Jonathan Edwards' sermon, one of the most famous sermons in American history, is "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God." And so I think we all have this sense of there's danger in the world and things are uncertain. Psychologically, we have that sense like, oh no, like I may not be okay. The universe is out to get me. And there's some, like, I would say, anthropological reason for us to have those instincts. And so you layer onto that theology that can take advantage of that and can speak to that. It can become very powerful. And if that theology then allows to perpetuate like power, then you create power and structure and systems that benefit from that story, and they create the problem and are the antidote. Mm-hmm. So there's anxiety in the public around God. Again, sinners in the hands of the angry God is this very vivid, compelling piece of writing that is this, also a piece of oration or speaking that Jonathan Edwards talks about God holding you over the flames of hell, like as a spider. And like God is so angry and so mad at who you are and our sin. And it's so bad. And you start, if you can, it's easy to prey on that instinct that some of us have, that fear, that anxiety that we have. And so somebody's got to pay the price for what you've done. Look, you lied. You looked at porn. You cheated on your wife. You stole when you were a kid. Like, we all have this residual guilt, I think, that hangs around. And so penal substitutionary atonement not only perpetuates that or magnifies it, but also gives us a relief valve that gets that fear off our backs. And so I think it's historically the way American culture formed came from a lot of Protestant culture, and that thread was there. And there's some good to this. It paints like a really high view of God, that God is holy and like to be worshipped and it's just beyond us. But also they add that God is like to be feared so much that we can't go near God, that God looks at sin and is just so angry at it and would burn us all up in an instant, and that we all deserve hell unless there's something that pays the price for our sins. So I think it got popular. It became the norm. It's a good story. And if we don't examine it though, like, it's a good story in that it catches you.
Yeah.
It preys on anxiety, and it offers a relief and something to do, like to feel the anxiety off your back. What it doesn't do, and this is one of the quotes we shared, which I love the quote, it doesn't love you into God. It fears you into God. Like, shit, God's going to destroy me. Like, what do I need to do? Well, come say your prayer, ask for forgiveness, like repent, and then you're good to go. And I don't know, that doesn't draw you into a relationship with God. Like, in my experience, it just creates this like cosmic Zeus feeling of God's out to get me, or Santa Claus counting my, good behavior or bad behavior. So I think it's a way to use low level fear or high level fear in the story, a psychological fear a lot of us carry that then Christianity in America has the answer to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, I'm
that's
riffing. I'm talking too much.
that's no small topic, and fear is such a big motivator. And I can talk at length about my thoughts around fear and motivation, but I won't. What I do want to do is actually hear you talk a little more. You had mentioned um, this past Sunday not feeling as if we were able to do what we may have set out to do, hence the reason why we're again here chatting through it all. How did you feel about the talk in general, and more importantly, what did you want to cover today that you were not able to necessarily tap into this past Sunday?
Yeah, for sure. It's funny if you are watching this. I don't know how many of our community, we're all so fried on screens nowadays, but there is, like, sermons are weird because you're talking about very important, significant things, but you're a flawed person, so you're never going to get it right. And then when you bring up subjects that are controversial or tricky, there's just danger there, or you feel there's danger of like saying it wrong or not saying enough or not finishing or like forgetting this one person's take on it. And so overall, I think we need to change our view of how we experience the sermon to just listening to something God might say through these incomplete, broken people, rather than like, are they saying it right and are they the voice of God? Because I think that's psychologically too much burden for both the person speaking and then also for those in the audience. It's just an unhealthy thing. So I left being like, it didn't, like, people are very gracious. Like, it's, most people who do anything in public, we are our worst critics generally. Like, we're always going to second guess. But I was like, I wish I could do that over. And I think I missed a couple pieces, and maybe the why wasn't clear enough. Like, I had thoughts of like, dude, we're only 3 weeks into being in person. We're all just like limping back into church. Why don't we just like have some easier conversation? And I think maybe the first couple of weeks had more of that. And this was like, all right, now let's open up Pandora's box a little bit. And so I'm glad we can do that, but also like, I don't know if maybe I'd save this for another time. Also, there were a couple things specifically that I didn't get to say, and I was hoping to have Q&C, questions and conversations, afterwards, but we didn't have time. And so it just felt like, I wish we could have, there's more I wanted out of this topic. So yeah, that's that. I think that's where I left. But ultimately I didn't feel, I'm a baseball fan, so I use a baseball analogy. Sometimes you strike out.
Yeah.
And my goal is always just get on base or have a productive out, which is like, you might get out, but you advance a runner.
Mm-hmm.
And overall, you don't want to do damage. I think that's
right.
You don't want to create harm.
Right. No,
I don't think there could have been harm, but I haven't heard.
Oh yeah, you definitely harmed me, Chris. I left feeling wounded. No. You had mentioned getting some feedback post the service, and in previous conversations between you and I, you had mentioned there was a kind of a base note that you wanted to land on. What was that? Can you?
Yes. Thanks for asking that. So I'll pull this back up. I had meant to, at the end of my talk, like in rhetoric and sermon giving, there's like rhetorical devices or tools. You want to speak to people's head, you want to speak to people's heart, you want to get people asking questions. And I think it was kind of heady and not enough heart at the end. Like, how do you connect all these high level ideas to your lived experience? And I kind of wanted to do this exercise, and I wasn't confident in it. I'm still not fully confident, so that's why I didn't go for it. But like, if you are in a burning building and you're stuck, like just picture yourself in a house or something, some fire catches. Maybe you had lit a match and that started it, or maybe it just started without, we don't know how it started, but a fire's there. Maybe like you didn't upgrade the alarm system or something. So like there might be some complicitness in the fire, but ultimately it doesn't matter because there's a fire right now. The house is burning. And if somebody comes up to that house and starts asking the questions of like, well, you did something wrong. So before I go rescue you, I'm going to need to like get you to pay a fee for not updating your fire alarm, or like I need to make you feel really guilty for lighting that match and lighting that candle and leaving the room and putting it next to a window that's going to blow over. Like, and I think the exercise would be like, what do you picture if God shows up, walks up to that burning house, burning building? What do you picture in God's heart? And for me, as I've come to like grow in my faith, or hopefully intimacy, awareness of God, God's presence, and I just picture somebody in love running into the building and taking on burns and scars and whatever to rescue us without any, that's it.
Yep.
Like it's this picture of love, and there aren't these other things that happened, and rescuing us and moving us towards healing. And so you look at all these models, like trying to describe this historical event that happened. I think maybe there's some wisdom to all of them. Like, I think there's some real danger to some. But like I mentioned with penal substitutionary atonement, I actually like that they have such a high view of God, where like God is, and I also think that God is like saddened by our sin, by our brokenness, by our like depravity and the way we hurt each other and the planet. But I don't think that's the full story. And so you look at all these ideas, and maybe they can resonate together. But I think the bass note has to be like in a guitar. There's like the bass string or whatever. There's the root note, and the chord. The rest of the notes like play in relationship to that bass note. And I think we got to get our bass note right, which is, for me, if the cross doesn't tell us something about how God is loving, then that's the bass note. We should look at that event through, and then look at all these over here, all these ideas, and see how they complement God's love. So yes, this is an example to live by. Yes, there was some sort of like something like satisfaction that happened. Like something was wrong and something was fixed. In a certain way, I do think the cross frees us from our stuff. How, I don't know exactly, but there's some sort of like, we are in bondage here. We are caught in this world that needs to be fixed. And so you can go through them all, but I think the bass note needs to be love, and then the other ones can play on each other. If the bass note is like a God of wrath, then you're going to look at all these differently. And I think that's when you get out of tune, which I think is music and theology are a good parallel, because it is more about, it's an art, it's learning, it's fluid, it's alive. It's something mystical. Music is like weird. It's just sound waves flowing through the air.
Yet it's also very mathematical.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
So good. I love it.
And our brains are uniquely wired to experience music. So that was kind of the bass note thing that, like, I wish I'd kind of landed on this more. These could all be okay. There's probably wisdom to them all. Some, I think are more dangerous than others, have been misused and should be called in for their misuse. But ultimately, there should be some also freedom to explore and to like look at the cross, like turn it around and look at the different angles to like what happened and why is it so powerful? Why is it so historically significant? Why is it so personally significant, and so forth?
Yeah. Well, that's good, man. I like that. I have some thoughts.
Okay. I have a question for you.
Oh, go for it.
I'm going to go back to this quote. If you're frightened into God, typo, it is never the true God you meet. If you're loved into God, you meet a God worthy of both Jesus and Christ. How you get there is where you arrive. What's your sense on how people find God? Do you think it's out of those two, if it's this, we're using this dichotomy right now, like frightened into God or loved into God? In your experience, both your own experience, but also like being pastor for a while and hearing people's stories and stuff. How do people connect to God? Like initially, what are the ways? You said something about, I have thoughts on being like frightened into things, or fear as a motivator versus love as a motivator.
Yeah, no, it's good, man. The word that comes to mind is urgency. And what I mean by that, kind of playing off of your analogy of the fire, right? If there are people in a building and the building's on fire, there is a sense of urgency, hopefully, to remove those people from the sense of danger, the presence of danger. One could argue that there's, from one perspective, a fear that loved ones or people in general can be hurt. So our hope is in trying to remove them. There's an urgency associated with that. So when people want God's story, God's narrative in people's life, then there's an urgency around that to share the gospel. So fear and urgency are like, they're like cut from the same cloth, almost. Not the same thing, but they very much appear similar in that when fear is present, there is always a sense of urgency. So when you ask the question, in my experience, what has brought people to God? From my perspective, love does a better job of sustaining relationships as far as to the divine, faith, community. When people are loved on, they may not sense that sense of urgency unless they have it already in their lives. If I have an urgent need for something and someone provides it and I feel that love, that's going to open some doors to conversation and to relationship, but it's not necessarily going to keep me there unless the urgency stays there, right? Unless I'm getting that need met to the point where enough time has passed that relationship is now founded on love, and boom, there's some people at Oak Life, to make it more tangible, that have went through some hard times and built some really good relationships with the community that is Oak Life, and they are with us, over these 7 years and 6 years, 5 years into it, and we're family. On the flip side, going back to that fear thing, if you can keep people afraid, there's always going to be that urgent sense to do something, to act. You need volunteers. Say that faith is secondary to works, and people will work for their salvation because they're afraid that they won't have it, right? So it's just this weird relationship. How do we have urgency in a way that is not fear-based, that's healthy, while maintaining a steady pace, knowing that love is a slow drip. It's not this thing that is instant, right? So those are some of the thoughts that I was thinking. I don't know if that really answers the question that you asked, but
it's good.
It's always a both and.
Yeah, there's so much stuff to think through there. Like, why isn't love more urgent? I mean, this is a broader, like, we should have urgency around love, right? If love is the thing, if God is love, if love is the thing that changes us, why don't we have more urgency? It's like love is gracious and is chill. Love is like, yeah, whatever, like it's okay. And so we take advantage of that, which maybe it's okay. Love isn't in a hurry. But there are dangers in our world, and the fire is real out there, right? There is like the isolation, loneliness, depression, all these spiritual realities that manifest in how we look at each other and divide and hate and go to war. Like, at the root of it, it's a lack of love, like, and understanding. And so we should feel like urgent with our love. I wonder if God's ever like, just like, come on guys, like, I love you, it's chill, but like, I don't know. I wonder where God's posture there is.
I'm sure it's all the time. I think in in the same way that we say God is love and God is beyond our comprehension, I think in a very similar way, we put love in a box that that points to our lack of understanding to the full scope of love, right? And not that I have the answer, but I think that when we hear the term love, which is why I'm very passionate about the word love, in that we cut it short. If I was to ask you right now, I wish there were some people with us, because I'd ask them to put it in the comments. What does love look like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? I'm sure it would be things that are like some adjectives like warm, cozy, soft, fun, bright, like all of these feel good senses when running into a burning building as an act of love is anything but feel good, right? So I think love can be urgent. I think love can be very intense and motivating, but because we have these other understandings, we're going to lean to what our body's DNA and design wants us to lean to, and that's the less intense stuff, the more cozy stuff. Whereas fear doesn't have as broad a spectrum. It is very short. It is like, this is going to hurt. I don't want this. That's it. So it's way easier to comprehend fear. So that's why I feel that it's an easier motivator and has been throughout all of history. Love is hard. It's hard to comprehend fully. And I think the scriptures that point to what love is, though they're beautiful, also fall short of the full scope of what love is and can be.
It's good. It reminds me of the narrow and the wide path that Jesus uses. Like, many go down that path. The walking the path of love is narrow. It's hard. It's a lot harder. It's a lot messier. Like, as the example of Jesus, it takes you to the cross. And fear is really ultimately about self-protection, right? They're motivating. So everyone wants their comfort, and the fear is that would be taken away, or their safety, or their standing with each other, with the universe. But because fear isn't always bad, right? Like, I think there's a fear of not loving, right? There's like types of fear that could be motivating you towards something, but yeah. So maybe the question for everyone is, like, when we're hearing God talked about, does it smell like love or does it smell like fear? Like, and smell may not be. Does it feel like love or feel like? What do they say? Dogs can smell fear.
Yeah,
that's what we just need. Good dogs at church to tell us, like, this preacher making us all. What's the stress hormone?
Cortisone.
Yeah,
Like
that sounds right. Is that increasing in this audience, or is it
yeah.
Compassion, love, mercy, all those things, which we should feel urgency about?
Yeah, man.
It's good.
Yeah, we got to know what to be urgent and when not to. You know, it's a great way to understand pace is jiu-jitsu, because in jiu-jitsu you learn when to be like intense and sprint versus when to be chill and lax, and it's all a part of the same dance. It's very symbolic of the Trinity. I mean, like, I can continue.
Yep, it's good.
That's fun.
I'll get to the A's soon. You got to bring up jiu-jitsu. We did have one question. So that was one of the things I was curious about, if there were questions from the audience, and we did have one on YouTube, and I put it here. Somebody asked, going back to all those models, how is penal substitution different from satisfaction? I understand the others, but I'm wondering what the difference is between those two. So I'm just going to read something. The classic formulation of satisfaction will be distinguished from penal substitution. Both are forms of satisfaction theory, and they speak to how Christ's death was satisfactory, but penal substitution and satisfaction offer different understandings of how Christ's death was satisfactory. Anselm, who is kind of one of the people we attribute satisfaction theory to, Anselm says that human sin is a defrauding of God and the honor he is due. And so Christ's death is the ultimate act of obedience, brings God great honor. As it was beyond the call of duty for Christ, it is more honor than he is obliged to give. Christ's surplus can therefore repay our deficit. So it's more about honor. And so it's like, satisfactory. And conversely, penal substitution differs in that it sees Christ's death not as repaying God for lost honor, but repaying the penalty of death, the sentence, the term that we have to pay for our sin, and Jesus pays for those things. So it's penalty of death that had always been a moral consequence for sin. The key difference here is that satisfaction is an alternative punishment or payment, but substitution, penal substitution, is paying the exact fee, if you will. Does that make sense? No?
Said a lot of words, man. Sum it up.
From what I'm reading there, satisfaction is like there's something off that we missed, like God is due, that never really got satisfied. And it's not as much as directly correlated to us and our specific sinful nature as much as it is about satisfying what God is deserving of. And so it's an alternative payment. Substitution is like a one-to-one. Like this went out of balance. Jesus pays for that, and then it goes into balance. So it's like paying for ours versus just, it doesn't pay our price. It just fills the void. Like those tickets are $20, and I could pay for them, or somebody else pay for them, whatever. Just as long as it gets paid, that's what's cool. Right. Penal substitution is you owe me $20. Yeah, and you better pay up, son.
Yeah.
So,
son. Good. That's good. No, I dig it.
Well,
I dig it.
Any other thoughts on the cross?
I mean, this conversation can
continue.
I feel like it's worth a study, even like if we did an Oak Life study on kind of the why, because I've heard arguments that, well, the first sacrifice we see is in the book of Genesis, where there was a sacrificial activity because of the sin of eating the apple, and then that was the first time we seen bloodshed on the behalf of human error. And then the whole book of Leviticus kind of lays this foundation of how sacrifice needs to be happening in these acts of purification, because God hates sin, so we can't be in God's presence unless we do these things. And there's a lot of rhetoric and understanding around Christianity in 2021 that is, in my opinion, kind of a poor reflection of what was established in Leviticus. And it's like, so it would make sense that leads to this understanding of what atonement is, also could be kind of this misinformed understanding. So I think this is a very necessary conversation. It's my 2 cents. But I think that even the 42 minutes that we just spent doesn't do it full service and full justice. So stroke of the beard. Maybe we'll do something more.
Yeah, we could go further, because I have thoughts on a lot of the Old Testament or the Hebrew scriptures, like examples of sacrifice. Because I think just to summarize briefly, to do a teaser, Jesus coming satisfies those things, or flips them on their head, or gives us, like, it's the Hebrew scriptures from the Christian perspective is people trying to work out their view of God. God needs us to sacrifice blood.
Yeah.
And you start to see hints of God saying, that's not what I'm about, like the sacrifice of Isaac with Abraham. You see God like using this culturally specific way of expressing worship. They're sacrificing something and saying, actually, that's not really what I'm about. But using that same metaphor to illustrate that the most significant thing you can give up for somebody else is your progeny. In their culture, your firstborn.
Yeah.
And so it's like somewhat metaphoric, but also real at the same time.
So good. So good.
So, want to tell us your thoughts on the atonement?
Yeah, that's probably a good indicator that we should be wrapping up. It's about 45 minutes, man. People don't.
You want to go another 2 hours? We could. It's a long form podcast now. I heard they're popular with the kids. 3 hours of BSing each other.
Oh man, only if you're Joe Rogan or.
Don't utter that name in our church. I'm just kidding.
That's so funny. Well, no, this is good, man. This is good. I always will put this out. If you have been watching or are watching currently at a later time, don't be afraid of that comment section, because we can keep the conversation going. Again, I would love to know kind of what the pulse is around individuals being interested, because if there is any interest, this is a good study. I think this is a really good study. So, yep, that's it. That's all I got. All right,
Art night, 7:30 tonight.
All right, but if you're watching this in November, then you missed out on art night.
Go watch the video. It's gonna be some.
All right,
I'm almost
Oakland,
nervous.
continue to live, love, fight, and follow as Jesus did and does. And we out this thing. Love you.
Talk soon.
That's it. That's it.
Talk soon.
I ain't got a hope.
I ain't got it.